We are going to be talking about naming your podcast. And I think this is a really interesting topic because there is no right or wrong way of naming your podcast. It is so personal to you and to your podcast. So for this video, rather than actually giving you a step-by-step, this is how you are going to name your podcast, what I'm going to be doing is actually giving you some tips and some things to consider when it comes to naming your podcast. Now, the first thing that I'm going to say is keep it simple. Don't overthink it, because you can get so bogged down in, I don't know what to name it, and should I go this, and should I do this, that actually weeks and weeks and weeks pass, maybe months pass, and you've got so much content stored up that you are just not delivering because you're really overthinking your podcast name. So just keep it simple. What I would recommend is when you first think of a podcast name or a few names, write them down. And if there's one that you are always coming back to, that's probably telling you something about that particular name, that it suits your podcast in one way or another. I'll give you some examples as to how I came up with the names of the two podcasts that I host. So first of all, The Confident CEO was not originally called The Confident CEO. Going right back, and if you go back to original episodes, you'll even hear it on the original intros, that the Confident CEO podcast used to be called Bloggers Creating Courses. Now, the reason I came up with that name is because the podcast was aimed at people in the blogging community creating online courses. So to me, that name really, really encapsulated who it was for and what they were trying to achieve. However, we know that the podcast got rebranded. Obviously, it's not called Bloggers Creating Courses anymore because the conversation shifted towards business. And I didn't feel that I was serving just the blogging community, but the podcast was actually overall female entrepreneurs. So the name that I kept coming back to was The Confident CEO. Now, I've already got the journal range, the Confident CEO journal range. So that tied in really, really nicely. And I decided to really capitalize on this Confident CEO brand. The Confident CEO is simple, it's memorable, it's got some alliteration in there. And what's great about it as well is that confidence is a very searchable term. CEO is a very searchable term as well. And when you type in CEO into Apple Podcasts, The Confident CEO is like one of the top 10 podcasts that appears. So that's my next tip, is also thinking about SEO and search engine optimization. What is it that people are searching for, that those keywords you could potentially, not always, but potentially use in your podcast title? Similar to the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting, again, it's a searchable term. It's an incredibly general and generic keyword, so it's not the best one. However, it is still searchable. Same as Guide to or Lazy Girls. They are keywords that people could potentially be searching for. As I said, they're not the best keywords in the world, but there is a searchable quality to them. But more than anything, how I named the Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting was not actually about SEO, but it was about making a memorable title. So again, that brings me on to point 3 of making sure that your podcast title is somehow memorable. So I get told The Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. Yeah, okay, it's long, but it's memorable. It's also telling you who it's for. It's for lazy girls, not necessarily lazy people, but people who want short, effective, easy to implement and actionable strategies and action points. It's telling you as well, what are you going to be doing? You are going to be achieving a podcast. So again, it's memorable, but it comes in to, again, with Bloggers Creating Courses, The Confident CEO, The Lazy Girl's Guide to Podcasting. Each of them is telling you who the intended audience is. A confident CEO, somebody who doesn't have an awful lot of time to create a podcast and wants it to be done quickly. You're a blogger. They're easy to remember and they're easy to implement because you know who the podcast is for. The other thing you can do is try and do a little bit of a pun on something. For example, I'm going to use the therapy couch as an example. We know that the therapy couch is well, everyone knows what therapist couch is, but, is it called Crouch Therapy? No, it's called Crouch Therapy, sorry. There is this podcast called Crouch Therapy. Obviously, it's a pun on couch therapy, but Crouch Therapy is hosted by Peter Crouch, the footballer, and his wife, Abby Clancy. And they talk about all things to do with family life and couples, all sorts of things. So calling it Crouch Therapy is a play on couch therapy. So therefore, again, it's memorable, but it helps them stand out from the crowd because they're also using their surname within that. It's also really short and sweet, again, like the Confident CEO. My next tip is I would recommend that you avoid trademarked names. You might be thinking to yourself, yes, but that particular podcast title, it's, that particular name is not trademarked for podcasting. I'm not going to go into how trademarking works, but basically when you've got a trademark, it's normally in a certain category. You need to, register your trademark in lots of different categories for it to be relevant. So for example, with the Confident CEO, I have got that trademarked for planners, for journals, digital products, downloads, and physical planners and journals. I don't have it trademarked for, I don't know, cola drinks, for example, for fizzy drinks. So if somebody wants to create the Confident CEO fizzy drinks, they're not infringing on trademark because I don't own the Confident CEO trademark in that category. But kind of regardless of that, and obviously that's not legal advice because that was like a 20-second download on trademarks, but do avoid trademark names. Don't think to yourself, well, it's not trademarked as a podcast title, so therefore I'll use it because it's going to be really easy to show up from a search engine point of view. You run the risk of getting yourself into a lot of legal drama. And again, I'm not going to recommend that you do or you don't get your particular podcast title trademarked. I would just say that if you're thinking of getting it trademarked, then do please talk to somebody who has got the legal expertise and qualifications in your legal jurisdiction. But do just avoid trademarked names. You don't want to give yourself issues without, if you don't need them. Test it out as well. Go and ask different people. This is what I'm thinking of calling my podcast. What do you think? Or when I say this, what do you think of? Because it's amazing how we can think a name is absolutely amazing. And then we taste it to somebody else and they're like, oh, it sounds like you're opening up a fish and chip shop. Or it sounds like you're opening up, I don't know, I would say that that's a magazine for elderly people. I would say that that's a children's play group. You get my point. You know what your idea is about, but how does it come across to other people? And don't just ask your nan or your mum or your husband, ask a range of people. And if you're thinking, but I don't want to talk to people about the podcast idea, well, how are you going to market your podcast if you're not going to be talking about it? So already you want to be talking to people, go on social media, go on Instagram stories. This is what I'm doing. This is going to be the podcast. This is the concept. Which of these 3 ideas is your favorite? Because already people are then buying into this idea that, in 3 months time, in 6 months time, sometime this year, Verity is bringing out a podcast. I'm going to pay attention to that. I'm going to sign up to the email newsletter because I want to know when that drops. So test it out on different people. But equally, as I said, I think my biggest tip for creating your podcast title is just not to overthink it.